Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sweet Life Talks. I'm joined today by Cyrus Khambatta from masteringdiabetes.org, and I'm very excited about this. Cyrus, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bridget.
What we are going to do today is give kind of an overview of the Mastering Diabetes philosophy, which is pretty much opposite to any other diabetes approach I have ever read about. So to give you some background, I heard Cyrus and his partner Robbie talking on a podcast. I looked up their website, watched a couple of the videos, and I've just finished their very long, very impressive. And how many scientific articles were quoted in your book? Hundreds.
800.
Yeah. I did not look at any of the scientific articles, but they were
perfect. Don't even want to trust us. There's a lot of science in that.
So there's three things that we're going to be discussing today from the Mastering Diabetes perspective. The one is diet, the one is insulin resistance, and the third is intermittent fasting. So I'm going to give my layman's view of what I took out of your book, and then you can correct me if I'm wrong. The Mastering Diabetes approach to diet for type 1 diabetics, type 1.5 diabetics, which is also LADA, type 2 diabetics, and pre-diabetes is a low-fat, plant-based, whole food diet. So that means no animal products, no processed foods, and lots of carbs.
Yes, but we got to be really specific about the types of carbohydrate we're talking about. Because I know in the world of diabetes, people get scared. Like the word carb is like a phobia. It's like, oh, I can't eat carbs. I can't eat carbs. Right? And so rather than, we specifically don't talk about this as though it's a high carb diet because it's too scary. So what we do is we talk about the fact that it's a low fat diet, which is true. But we can get into detail about the specific type of carbohydrate is very important. So cookies, crackers, chips, soda, sugar sweetened beverages, waffles, pastries. Those are not the types of carbohydrate that we advocate at all. Throw those in the trash can. What we talk about are fruits, starchy vegetables like sweet potatoes, yams, things that grow on the ground, plus legumes, beans, peas, lentils, and then whole grains. Those classes of carbohydrate, fantastic. The more you eat, the better your blood glucose control becomes. So that's just a clarification. But yes, we advocate a diet that is higher in whole carbohydrate and lower in total fat. And when you do that, magical things unfold.
So the first question everyone has is obviously, how are you getting enough protein in your diet?
Yes. Okay. So I love the protein talk because protein has been historically considered to be like the most important of all the nutrients. Okay. It doesn't matter what your carbohydrate is. I don't care about your carbohydrate or your fat. Where are you getting your protein? You hear that all the time, right? People are sort of brainwashed to believe that protein is king. And it turns out that there's a couple of problems with this philosophy. Number one, protein is not everybody has a protein requirement, meaning there's a certain amount of grams of protein you're supposed to eat on a daily basis in order to meet your protein requirements. Now, protein in the human body is used for 1,000 different things. So yes, protein builds your muscles, no question. But in addition to that, protein is also mainly used as you construct hormones. Okay, so hormones, cell receptors, proteins that get embedded into the plasma membrane of cells all throughout your body, in your thyroid gland, in your brain, in your eyes, in your pancreas, you name it. So protein has a wide collection of uses. And most people think, oh, if I eat a plant-based diet, I can't grow muscles. I will get really skinny and I will get really frail and then I will fall over and I will break a bone and I will die. That's what people think, right? But the truth is that there's a couple of things to think about. Number one, when you eat a plant-based diet, you absolutely can meet your protein requirements and you can exceed your protein requirements very easily. A simple way to calculate your protein requirement is to take your body weight in kilograms and multiply that number times 0.8. Okay, so do you mind me asking how much you weigh?
Don't 100% know, but probably around 68-ish. Okay,
perfect. So if you take the number 68 and you multiply that times 0.8, that right there is 54. Okay? So your base level requirement for protein is approximately 54 grams of protein. Okay? If you were very athletic and you were, strength training in particular, then your protein requirements will go up, and it go from a 54, it can go all the way upwards of 68, which is 1 gram per kilogram, or it can go as high as 1.2 grams per kilogram. So we're looking at 55 grams to call it 80 grams per day. Okay.
But how much is that? What does that mean in food?
Good question. Okay. So if you go and eat a plant-based diet, the question is, well, where does that stuff come from? Okay. Yeah. 1 cup of beans or lentils or peas contains between 15 and 20 grams of protein right there.
Okay.
Okay. So let's say you ate 2 of those a day. 2 cups of lentils or beans or peas, anything like that. Okay. That right there already makes up between 30 and 40 grams of protein. Okay. And remember, you're looking for 55. If you have a little bit of quinoa, it's in there. There's a little bit of protein in bananas. There's a little bit of protein in sweet potatoes. There's a little bit of protein in cauliflower, in tomatoes, right? There's small amounts of protein that when you eat a wide selection of fruits add up to a larger number. And then the foods that are protein heavier are the beans, the peas, the lentils, and some of the whole grains as well.
That was one of the things that really surprised me in your book is this. I had never thought about the fact that fruit and vegetables had small amounts of protein in them. I knew there were some that were very protein rich, but I didn't know about the others. But I love this idea, and I don't think anyone will argue, no matter what diet they're eating, I don't think anyone would argue that the concept of whole food is so much better for you because you're getting the whole package. You're not getting one extract of it taken out and you're eating it on its own, you're getting the whole package. But the question everyone is going to have who hasn't just finished your book, I feel like I have a better understanding of your argument now. How is eating this level of carbohydrates, fruit especially, you know that fruit is the devil for many people, especially on low carb diets. How is eating this level, this amount of carbohydrates? Because I know that in some of your meals, you're suggesting like 150 grams of carbohydrates a meal.
Easy.
How does that not send your blood sugar through the roof?
Yeah. How's that even possible? How's that even physiologically possible? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's the crux of the question. If you take your average person living with either pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes, okay, they've been probably told to eat a low carbohydrate diet, whether it's a paleo diet or a zone diet, or maybe the Atkins diet, or maybe the ketogenic diet. Okay. So what they'll do is,
in the South African context, I'm just going to interrupt you because low carb is actually fairly new in the South African context. It's like landed on the scene maybe 10 years ago, but it took a couple of years to gain popularity. And so there's kind of an even split of people who are on low carb and others who are on the more moderate South African diet. So our dietitians still recommend half a plate of green leafy vegetables, quarter plate whole grain starch, and a quarter plate of protein with some fat in the middle.
Got it.
So those are like the two parties. Sorry, carry on.
Okay, cool. So whether you're eating a low carbohydrate diet or whether you're eating a medium carbohydrate diet, okay, what most people with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes will experience is that as soon as they eat that carbohydrate, they'll go check their blood glucose, an hour later, 2 hours later, and they'll look at the number and they'll be like, wait, what? Why is the number so high? Right? I guess carbohydrates are bad for me. Right? And so what the conclusion that dietitians and doctors and people with diabetes make is they say, oh, look, when I eat carbohydrate, even if it's a sweet potato, even if it's a banana, my blood glucose goes high. Therefore, carbohydrates are bad for me. Okay. But it's too easy. It's too simple. It's not biologically accurate to make that statement. What you have to do is go backwards and try and say, okay, is it the carbohydrate that's at fault? Or is it something else in your diet that is blocking the carbohydrate from being able to be metabolized properly? Okay. So carbohydrate is one component of the food that you eat, but in the food that you're eating, in a whole food, you have multiple things. You have carbohydrate, fat, protein, vitamins, minerals, fiber, water, antioxidants, and phytochemicals. That's 9 classes of nutrients that are in practically every whole food you can consume. Okay, so all we're doing is we're saying, okay, of those 9 classes, carbohydrates are at fault. But there's 8 other things that we have to pay attention to in order to really understand, is the presence of some of those 8 things blocking carbohydrates from being absorbed. So if you dig into the research, what you'll find is that when you consume a diet that is medium or high in fat, especially if it's saturated fat, Okay, saturated fat comes from mainly animal foods, red meat, white meat, chicken, fish, shellfish, dairy products, milk, but also can be found in nuts, seeds, avocados, vegetable oils, coconuts. The better types of fat-rich foods. But when you consume a diet that contains a significant amount of fat, the presence of that fat blocks the ability to absorb and uptake carbohydrate properly. Okay, so it's the two of them are sort of always at war with
each other. Okay.
They're competing against each other. Exactly right. And this is true because this is what happens inside of a mammalian biology. Okay, you're a mammal, I'm a mammal. All mammals have the exact same physiology, or very, very similar physiology, which is that when you increase your fat intake, then your carbohydrate metabolism, your carbohydrate utilization goes down. But when you lower your fat intake, your carbohydrate tolerance goes up. So what the low carbohydrate world does, or what the traditional world does, is it says, hey, listen, I want you to eat either a medium amount of fat or a high amount of fat. And as a result of that, your carbohydrate tolerance goes down, right? So that means that if you're already eating a medium amount of fat or a high amount of fat, then when you eat carbohydrates, it doesn't work, right? So what we recommend is to do the opposite, which is to lower your fat intake so that you can raise your carbohydrate tolerance. And when you do that, when your fat intake is low, then you can eat carbohydrate-rich foods like potatoes and fruits, lots of fruits, legumes, and whole grains. So the next logical question is, okay, why? Why am I even trying to eat carbohydrate-rich food in the first place? Okay, why would I do that instead of eating avocados and nuts and some chicken? And the answer is because if you look in the research, again, inside of our book, we have 800 references, and there's a lot of science in here. If you look in
the book to give away.
Perfect.
We're going to do a giveaway, yeah. Okay.
So the research shows that people who eat more animal-based foods and the people who eat more protein-rich diets have have an increased risk for premature death in the long term. In other words, if you eat more protein and you eat more fat and you eat more animal products in your diet, your chances of dying early go up. So you live a shorter life and you end up with more chronic disease, more heart disease, more Alzheimer's disease, more fatty liver disease, and more chronic kidney disease. Okay? So by transitioning to a diet where you're eating more plant foods, it doesn't have to be 100% plant foods by any stretch, but just more plant foods and less animal products, you naturally go from a high fat intake, low carbohydrate tolerance to low fat intake, higher carbohydrate tolerance. And when you're in this scenario and you start to eat more whole carbohydrate rich energy, then you can extend your longevity. You have a lower risk for all these other chronic diseases. And part of the reason that happens is because the food you're eating is very nutrient dense. Vitamins, minerals, fiber, water, antioxidants, and phytochemicals. Every single time you eat those small behind the scenes players, the health of tissues all throughout your body go way up. And that's part of the reason why you end up with better longevity and more disease resistance in the long term. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me because I've read the book, but I just want to give the basic overviews, and I have a bunch of questions because I can hear my community members shouting in my ear.
Cool.
So one of the things I mentioned this speaking yesterday to one of our community members who is a huge low carb fan. He's been on it for 8 years. He's 51. He's in the best health of his life. His A1C is great. His weight is great. His energy is great. He said, what about the Maasai, who are I don't know if you know about them, they're like the tribesmen who lived in Kenya and Tanzania, they still do. And they lived on like a hunting diet and then transitioned to carbohydrates and became fat and sluggish and got type 2 diabetes. So
a couple of things.
Okay. You dive in there and then I'm going to ask my follow-up question. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I love how people use the Maasai warriors and then the Eskimos as like their two caveats, right? First thing is I would say is chances are you're not a Maasai warrior, number one.
Sadly,
chances are
yeah.
you're not an Eskimo, okay?
Yeah.
So trying to compare yourself to a Maasai warrior or to compare yourself to an Eskimo isn't a physiologically valid argument, okay? The reason for that is the Maasai warriors are extremely active. They're slender, they're extremely active, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And they also are, they're a genetically isolated community, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So the genetics that occur inside of the Maasai community are different than the genetics that occur in the large population because they're a smaller community that's basically, more sheltered genetically. So as a result of that, their physiology is just slightly different than the physiology of the general public. Same thing with Eskimos, it's slightly different. But there's also something we have to pay attention to. Maasai warriors don't live that long. Okay. From my understanding of the things that I've read, the average life expectancy of a Maasai warrior is somewhere in the 40s or 50s, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. These people are not living into their 70s, 80s, 90s. They're not. So yes, they may be skinnier. Yes, they may have more disease resistance, but they are not a model of longevity at all. Right. And the same thing goes for Eskimos. Their life expectancy is somewhere in the 50s, I believe. Right. So trying to say, okay, well, I want to eat like the Maasai warrior, I would say, well, I don't know. Do you really want to do that? Right. Secondarily, when you say, oh, well, they transitioned to a carbohydrate rich diet and they became fat and obese. Okay. The answer is it's not, chances are, I don't know what type of carbohydrate energy they were eating, but my gut tells me is they were not eating sweet potatoes and rice. They were probably eating processed carbohydrate rich food. And when you do that, anybody's going to become obese. You can take you can take a 6-year-old child and you can feed them a refined carbohydrate diet and they will gain weight and develop type 2 diabetes before the age of 10, right? So the type of carbohydrate matters, but also the life expectancy of both Maasai warriors and Eskimos is nothing to be impressed with.
So my question is less contentious. I don't have a strong opinion here. My question is, why does it have to be so extreme? So if we look at, I understand from reading all the case studies in the book that there are some people who are really struggling. They have chronic inflammation. They are very low on energy. Like life is bad. They've tried low carb. It dramatically didn't work for them. Is it not that some of us thrive on low carb, some of us thrive on low carb, some of us thrive on moderate?
Okay. So the answer is yes, there's small genetic differences between all of us that can differentiate your ability to withstand carbohydrates from mine, for sure. We have different body types. We have a different metabolic rate. We have slightly different slightly different carbohydrate tolerance, slightly different fat digestion ability. There's no question about that. So my objective is never to tell someone that like every single human being on this planet has to eat a low fat, plant-based whole food diet, because it's too simple, right? But the truth is that the overwhelming majority of humans possessing the mammalian physiology, like we talked about, will benefit from a diet that is lower in fat and higher in whole carbohydrate energy. That is a true statement amongst mammals. Okay. Now, shoot, I just lost my train of thought. We're going to go back to...
That's good. That answered my question. Okay. How could this work in a family context? So I told you I have 2 kids. So and one of your stories said when someone had a baby, they initially transitioned them onto this diet, and that was very smart of them to do. My kids are eating a normal diet. They eat a lot of vegetables. They eat a lot of fruit. Neither of them have diabetes. Thank goodness. I hope they never do. But how do you know anyone with kids in the modern day who are going to school and are managing to pull this off?
Absolutely. Yeah. So in our coaching program, we work directly with kids who, we try and educate them about transitioning to a plant-based diet. I will tell you this, it's harder. It's harder for a younger kid to transition to a plant-based diet than it is for an adult, because an adult can make their own decisions and do it confidently. And you can look at somebody and say, hey, I'm not going to eat that meatloaf. I'm sorry. Thank you for making it, but I'm not going to make it. It's hard for a kid to relay that same information. And instead, when a kid goes to a birthday party and they see a bunch of cake and, hot dogs, it's hard for them to not do that because everybody else is doing that and they want to feel...
it probably tastes delicious. They'll feel
It
awful
tastes
afterwards,
fantastic.
but it tastes great.
Exactly. I mean, I did that for 20 years, no question, right? So it's definitely challenging. But one of the things that I have noticed is that if you are interested in getting your child to eat more of a plant-based diet, I highly recommend it. One of the things you can do is you can not just give them food to eat, but help them get in the kitchen. Help them go to the grocery store, help them get in the kitchen, help them make the food. And as a result of that, it'll become more fun. Okay. So I have 5 nieces and nephews. And of the 5 nieces and nephews, every single time Uncle Cyrus comes into town, they're like, oh yeah, cool. What are we going to eat, Cyrus? What are we going to eat? You know? And so what we do is we go to the grocery store and we shop, and I let them choose the vegetables and fruits and put it in the cart. Right. And then we come home and we make food together. I'm like, okay, cool. You're going to shred those carrots. You're going to run the blender and you're going to saute those onions. Right. So they get inside of it and it's like a science experiment. It's really fun. And then we put the whole thing together. And then when we eat together. I'm like, hey, these are some good carrots. These are your carrots. Nice job.
You did so well.
Right.
Yeah.
So it gets them a sense of satisfaction. And then the next time they do it, it's like, hey, what do you want to eat? They're like, hey, can we make that carrot thing again? That's really tasty. I'm like, great, let's make the carrot thing again. Right. Yeah. So I would recommend getting them involved rather than just saying, hey, Billy, eat this food because I told you to eat this food. It's healthy for you. Right? Yeah. It's.
I just want one more clarification before we move on to insulin resistance. You keep referring to plant-based, and I know here people kind of switch out plant-based and vegan, but you have a different, do you want to explain your differentiation between them?
For sure. Plant-based is a general umbrella term. Okay. So within the plant-based movement, you have smaller like sects or smaller factions. Okay. The vegan movement, or the people who consider themselves vegan, are 100% animal free. Okay. So they don't eat anything, no dairy products, no meat, no eggs, no fish, nothing. Okay. They also don't have honey. Okay. Because honey comes from bees, and bees are animal, and bees are insects. So they don't have it. Right. A lot of vegans also, they won't wear leather, no leather belts, no leather shoes, no leather purses, nothing like that. Right. So it's like, it's both an animal rights issue as well as a dietary issue. Okay. That's what people who are considered vegan is. Then there's people who are considered plant-based who are saying, okay, you know what? I might have some eggs here and there. I might have a little bit of meat here and there, but the majority of my diet comes from plants. Okay. Those are plant-based people. You can also call them plant strong. That's another term that people use as well.
That's nice. Okay. We haven't heard that yet. And also, I think some vegan food here, particularly here, it's kind of just coming into fashion, but a lot of it is quite highly processed. So it will be like made to look like sausage, like vegan sausages made of a bunch of stuff. That's all vegan, but it ends up not being whole food, whereas plant-based to me is more the actual whole plant.
Exactly right. Exactly. You hit it on the head. So if you go to the grocery store and you buy a burger that is made out of soybeans and lentils and chickpeas, and it's gone through a manufacturing process and they formed it into a burger, you put it on the grill and you eat it. Okay. So good. It's plant-based. That's good. It's made from plants, but it's also processed, right? So packaged and processed, quote unquote, vegan food is a good transition to get to a whole food plant-based diet. But in my opinion, and what the research is showing, is that the people who eat the most whole foods, being either zero processing or minimal processing, those are the people that get the best health. So that's why we say,
I think that's a no-brainer. Like if we
it's not hard.
His advice was, I think it was Michael Pollan, who said, eat like your grandmother ate, not too much, mostly plants. Like that's my kind of eating philosophy. It doesn't have to get complicated. Okay, so now could you explain insulin resistance? Because in our context, insulin resistance is kind of a buddy, not a happy buddy, but a buddy to type 2 diabetes, and it's a problem that mostly people with type 2 diabetes are dealing with.
Yes.
But insulin resistance for you is at the basis of all diabetes. Correct.
That's exactly right. Okay. So insulin resistance is the cause of prediabetes, and prediabetes is the cause of type 2 diabetes. So what that means is that you cannot develop prediabetes or type 2 diabetes without first becoming insulin resistant. You have to be insulin resistant in order to get there. Okay. So that's what the traditional diabetes world knows. And that's why whenever you say the word insulin resistant, everybody goes, oh, okay, prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, that's it. Okay. It turns out gestational diabetes that women get when they're pregnant is also caused by insulin resistance. Okay. It turns out that even though, so type 1 diabetes, which is what I have, and type 1.5 diabetes, which is what, type 1 diabetes in older adults over the age of 30. These two are autoimmune conditions. And these two conditions are not caused by insulin resistance. They're caused by a foreign protein that then hijacks your immune system to kill the beta cells in your pancreas. But people who are living with type 1 and 1.5 diabetes, because they oftentimes eat a low carbohydrate diet, they then eat themselves into insulin resistance. So insulin resistance becomes a secondary feature of living with autoimmune diabetes. Does that make sense?
How do you know if you're insulin resistant?
Okay. A simple way to know if you're insulin resistant is if when you eat carbohydrate rich food, your blood glucose goes through the roof. That's the simplest description I can give you. Okay.
Every diabetic I've ever met.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. So if you try and eat something carbohydrate rich, as little as like one banana, or maybe like a mango, right? Or maybe a plate of beans, and you find that over the course of the next 2 hours, your blood glucose goes higher than, in our units, I would say higher than about 140. Okay, in your units,
I had to convert. I think that's 7.8.
Yeah, exactly. So if it goes anywhere, 7.5 or higher.
But if you've dosed insulin appropriately for it.
Well, it depends, because most people living with diabetes are not insulin dependent.
Oh, of course,
right?
Yes, that's true.
Okay, so we're talking about, let's say you have pre-diabetes or you have type 2 diabetes and you're not taking any insulin. You just eat food, and maybe you take metformin, or maybe you don't take any pills. Okay. If you eat a plate, or you have some carbohydrate rich food, what I recommend doing is testing about 50 grams of carbohydrate rich food. Okay, 50 grams of carbohydrate from either fruits, legumes, whole grains, or starchy vegetables. If you have
which is about the equivalent of 3 apples, 3 pieces of fruit, medium
3 apples,
fruit.
Exactly. 2.5 bananas. I'm not sure how many sweet potatoes, but yeah, it's a decent amount of carbohydrate.
Yeah.
Okay? So if you eat that, and within the next 2 hours, your blood glucose goes beyond 7.8 millimolar, okay, then what that means is that your digestive system and your liver and muscles are not capable of metabolizing that amount of carbohydrate. That carbohydrate exceeded your carbohydrate tolerance, okay? So that's a very simple test. If you want to get more technical, you can go to the doctor and you can get what's called an oral glucose tolerance test, where they give you a thing of water with 75 grams of glucose, and you drink that, and then they monitor your blood glucose over the course of time. They graph your glucose. And in that situation, if your glucose goes over 200, okay, 200 is the cutoff in our units, and in your units will be about 10, maybe 11.
10, yeah.
If it goes higher than that, then that means that you fail the glucose tolerance test, and that means that you are insulin resistant. Okay. So point being is that, like I said earlier, the goal is to be able to challenge your metabolism with carbohydrate rich food, whole carbohydrate rich food, right? So if you can do that, then that is an indicator that insulin works efficiently inside of your body. Okay. So let's go backwards here one more step. What is insulin? Insulin is a hormone that is manufactured by the beta cells inside of your pancreas. Now, everybody manufactures insulin. You manufacture insulin. I do. Cats make it. Dogs make it. Raccoons make it. Horses make it. Cows make it. Sheep make it. You name it. Okay. Insulin is a required biological hormone for mammals. And when you consume carbohydrate energy in your diet, the beta cells in your pancreas secrete insulin, and the purpose of insulin is to knock on the door of your liver and your pancreas, your liver and your muscle in particular, and go, knock, knock, there's glucose in the blood, do you want to take it up? And your liver and muscle have the opportunity to say, sure, okay, yeah, sure, give it to me. Or they say, no, I don't want this glucose, put it away, right? So if you're living in an insulin sensitive state, what happens is that when you eat the carbohydrate, then the insulin that is manufactured by your pancreas goes into your blood. It goes, knock, knock, liver, knock, knock, muscle. Do you want this glucose? Take it up. And both of them respond by saying, sure, give it to me, because they have the tolerance for the glucose. So they allow the glucose to come inside, and that's a good thing. because when the glucose gets inside of your liver and muscle, then it doesn't stay in your blood, and your blood glucose stays nice and low. And that's a good thing. Okay. If you're insulin resistant, what ends up happening is that insulin goes, knock, knock, liver, knock, knock, muscle. Do you want this glucose? And both of them say, no, 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 no. I cannot take that glucose right now. The reason they say no is because they've already accumulated excess fatty acids. There's too much fat that's been stored inside of your liver and muscle. And in that situation, the insulin communication pathway inside of your liver and muscle goes way down. So when insulin knocks, both of those tissues say, sorry, I can't even hear you. I can't hear you saying that. Sorry, I don't want it. And as a result of that, the glucose that's in your blood that would normally get inside of those tissues, the glucose is like, what do I do? I'm just in the blood. There's nowhere to go. And then when you check your blood glucose 2 hours later, you look at it and you go, why is my glucose high? Right? And the reason your glucose is high is because glucose is trapped in your blood. And the reason that glucose is trapped in your blood is because insulin could not signal to your liver and muscles to take the glucose out of your blood. And so as a result of that, there's a traffic jam, literally a metabolic traffic jam that's blocking glucose from going where it needs to go.
Right.
Right.
I love that explanation of insulin resistance.
That's it right there. I mean, it can be that simple.
You are almost acting it out. One more step and you'll have perfect.
No, totally.
That should be your next step.
Different hats.
Okay, final thoughts, because we are running over time here.
Sure.
Intermittent fasting. Why is it important, and how can diabetics safely intermittently fast?
Yeah, intermittent fasting is such a powerful technique. So in the Mastering Diabetes method, we have basically 4 components. We have low-fat, plant-based, whole food nutrition, intermittent fasting, daily movement, and then documentation, writing things down properly. Okay. So the reason why we put intermittent fasting as one of the components of the method is because the research shows that people who perform intermittent fasting get incredible results. And when I say incredible results, I mean that they have lower insulin, lower fasting insulin levels, lower post-meal insulin levels, lower glucose values, lower A1C values. They can lose weight easier, and their cardiovascular health is better. So performing an intermittent fast is actually not that difficult to do. There's many ways you can do it. There's 2 ways that we recommend. The first one is a once per week, 24-hour intermittent fast. So you choose one day out of the week to do an intermittent fast where you just don't eat for 24 hours. And when you do that, what you will find is that you're basically your muscles, your liver, your other supporting tissues inside of your GI tract, all of these tissues have stored energy inside of them. So over the course of time, they've stored glucose, they've stored fatty acids. And so when you stop eating food, those tissues have to burn what they already have inside of them. So it's a way of, sort of like housekeeping. You can think of it that way. It's like they just kind of like clean up. And, oh, look, I found this over here. Let's burn this and get rid of it, right? So that's part of the reason.
24-hour fast sounds so hectic, but actually the way you described it sounds very doable. So you have dinner at 6 and then stop eating after dinner, miss breakfast and lunch the next day, and then eat dinner again at 6 the next day.
That's exactly right. Approximately 24 hours.
Yeah, that seems much less terrifying to me than, because 24 hours fasting sounds very hectic. And you can drink water, of course. And you said herbal teas, I think. Yeah,
you can water, herbal teas. You can even have caffeinated teas. It's totally fine. That's not a problem. The second option is to do a 16-8.
Wait, one more question about that. How is that safe for diabetics? Because as diabetics, thinking like, oh my God, how would I live without food, as type 1 diabetic specifically? But the idea is just that you wouldn't take any fast-acting insulin.
Yes, exactly right. So if you inject insulin, just like I do, the only type of insulin that I would recommend doing during an intermittent fast is your basal insulin. So basal is like the background insulin. So you give yourself a one time a day basal insulin injection, or if you're on it, it's like, it's like a drip feed. Okay. So in that situation, if you're injecting the right amount of basal insulin, technically speaking, your glucose should be nice and flat. Okay. But then because you're not eating food, you don't have to take any bolus insulin or fast-acting insulin. So there's really not a problem. If you go hypoglycemic at any point during this process, and your blood glucose falls too low, what that means is that the amount of insulin, the amount of basal insulin you're giving yourself is too much. because that's the only insulin that's actually driving glucose down. So if you go hypoglycemic, don't panic. Just pick up a banana, eat a banana, and then hang out for 15 minutes, and your blood glucose will rise again, and then you continue. Okay. If your blood glucose goes really high, like let's say your blood glucose goes to 8, 9, 10, something like that, what that means is that the amount of basal insulin you're giving yourself is not enough. So you got to increase your basal in order to bring your blood glucose back down. If you're not injecting insulin and you just are living with prediabetes or type 2 or gestational, and you're not insulin dependent, what that means is that you can get by not eating food for 24 hours. And trust me, it's going to be a lot easier than you might think. It's really
I'm
not that
actually
hard.
very excited by this idea because it feels very similar to me as meditation. Like meditation is giving your brain a break. Digital detox is giving yourself a break from computers and screens for a weekend or a day or whatever it is. And I feel like maybe our bodies could just do with a pause because we're constantly feeding them. All the time,
exactly right.
For all kinds of reasons. Yeah, so I find that idea fascinating. Here, so insulin fasting is fairly popular here. The 16-8 is fairly popular, but I hadn't heard about the once a week 25. And why does it have to be once a week? Or is that just what
it doesn't have to be once a week. So if you're starting and you've never done this before, then make it once a week. It's just an easy way to get involved. If instead you're more sophisticated, you could do multiple times, or you could do twice per week. Or you could do a daily 16-hour fast. And that's actually the best way to do it, in my opinion. So that means all you have to do is eliminate either breakfast or dinner. That's it. And then you would basically, so let's say I decided to eliminate breakfast. I would start eating at noon at 12 o'clock, and then I would eat for 8 hours. So from noon to 8 p.m. is my window of eating. I just eat normally. I don't try and binge eat and try and eat too much. So that's 8 hours of opportunity. And then as soon as 8 o'clock p.m. rolls around, I stop eating. And I don't eat until 8 o'clock a.m. and then noon the next morning. That's 16 hours. And if you do that on a daily basis, what you'll find is that you can lose weight easier. Your blood glucose will normalize quicker. Your A1C value will drop quicker. Your cholesterol will drop quicker. And the reason is because you're doing that every single day and you turn it into a habit. And when you do that, your results actually come pretty quick. It's pretty nice.
Fascinating. So now I just want to wrap up with how do people find out more if they're interested, if they want to arm wrestle you over how wrong you are and how low carb is life. Where should people find you?
Okay, perfect. So if you go to our website is masteringdiabetes.org. Okay, so you can go straight there. There's a quiz on the website where you can try and find out your level of insulin resistance, and we do some sophisticated calculations to try and find out what it is. Okay. If you're also interested in picking up the Mastering Diabetes book, I highly recommend it. This thing became a New York Times bestseller, and we're very excited about that because it's making it's getting pretty far, and we're happy. So this book has not only science about insulin resistance, but it also has meal plans, and it also teaches you exactly how to get started eating a plant-based diet. So you can find this on Amazon. You can go to Barnes and Noble. And I think for you guys,
we don't have any of that. We can find it on Loot. That's the only place we can find it on.
Boom,
here.
there you go.
But
You know
I
how
will
to figure
link
it out.
that below. And we have one to give away to our community. We can do a competition. Okay, great. And then also on Instagram and Facebook, I imagine.
You can find us on Instagram and Facebook. On Instagram, we're at Mastering Diabetes. On Facebook, we're Mastering Diabetes, something like that. Yeah, we're all over the place.
Thank you so much for your time, Cyrus. I look forward to all the many comments we will be getting about this.
Please do. Yeah, I'm an open book. I'm here to help out in any way I can.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.
You too.
Bye.